Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. In case you're just joining us, this is Daybreak, and today we told you we are going to be talking about the transition to junior secondary school and also schools reopening in just under 3 weeks to come by the tail end of this month. And a lot is to be addressed. The elephant in the room now is the junior secondary school readiness that is supposed to be domiciled in primary schools. Are primary schools across the country ready? Do we have teachers? Are they trained? Do we have the facilities that are needed to successfully implement this and to offer quality education to our learners? Some of the questions that have been raised by stakeholders, parents and learners alike, and we are going to try and address some of those issues in this great conversation that begins right now.
And we are, as earlier mentioned, with the Member of Parliament for Tinderet constituency, who as well is the chairperson of the Education Committee of the National Assembly. Honorable Julius, many thanks for your time. Dr. John Mugo is an educationist and commentator on education in the country. Thanks for your time. It's all appreciated. And may I begin with you, Honorable Julius Meli. What's your view of the road ahead? Because there seems to be multi-layer of complexities with regards to junior secondary schools, the guidelines by the Ministry of Education as to the assessment that is to be done between the 9th of January to the 20th of January. And then, holistically, the new rules that schools will be coming up with, including the new uniforms and the management of junior secondary school learners. I mean, how is the road ahead for the stakeholders?
Yes, thank you, Abdikadir. I think, let me say this, that the road ahead is quite clear and good, in the sense that CBC as a curriculum is actually best for this country. I just want to mention that there might be some teething issues, but one of the very clear issues about CBC is that it actually looks at the competencies of the child, it looks at the talents of the child, it also looks into how to make education quite accessible to the parents. You've noted that as we move ahead, the issue of domiciling even the junior secondary in the primary section is actually to make it as accessible as possible to parents. Noting that in the earlier period, you know that for students to go to secondary school, it has been pegged on even the bed capacity of the boarding schools. Okay. It has brought a lot of congestion. But as we move now in grade 7, it is only a matter of actually having the children in the primary school, having the quality teachers, and I want to tell you that there is this country has enough in terms of skills of the teachers whom we have. So the only thing is to reorient them, to capacity build them, and to make sure that the facilities that are required are actually put in place. In fact, the CBC is going to make education for this country very, very cheap in terms of access and in terms of costs.
Dr. Mugo, I don't know whether you read from the same script. I mean, there's no doubt that the competency-based curriculum is a beautiful promise. And for those who still doubt, at least what we can say is that the train seems like has already left the station. I don't know, if you look at the way ahead, do you get the same sense of satisfaction that we are good to go? Many still are asking, are we ready? So are we ready from where you sit?
Thank you so much. I think, first, it's been unfortunate, and I can empathize with the Kenya Kwanza government, because we knew that junior secondary was to come, in 2016 when we began this implementation. But I think a lot of indecisiveness happened along the way, and now children cannot wait. They now have to go to junior secondary. I think the decision to domicile it in primary school was the right one, because why should we sink money in infrastructure, in concrete, constructing classrooms that will not be enough, when we know that the key thing for CBC to succeed, I think, are two things. One is a teacher. And I agree with Honorable Meli that we have enough teachers. What I think is needed is that we need the right teachers. I am a teacher trainer myself, and I know that CBC is an attitude change, is a mind shift. It's a new philosophy, a new way of educating. It's a teacher ceding power. And so we know that even if we say we'll take them for training, training and acquisition of knowledge and skills, that can be shifted. But the change in mind shift, in attitude of teachers is needed. So there's a lot to do, I think, in terms of calling on our teachers that this is about our children. Hey, because with a teacher who believes in CBC, in this new way of educating, even if they have children under a tree with them, CBC is now offering the opportunity to use locally available materials for the teacher to innovate and invent more than what the other curriculum was offering. The other key thing that needs to happen is a parent. And junior secondary, the objective of junior secondary is a transitional moment where the teacher, the parent, and the child sit together to identify the talent of this person, look at their interest in the future, in the next 10 years. What is this person best doing? And so that consultation has to happen. And the person at the middle of that consultation is first the teacher who has to call the parent.
Okay.
And the parent also who has to understand that they have a role to play, not just taking children to school, but also participating in making decisions for them. And so the decision to make it largely day, I think, was very necessary, because if we had domiciled this in secondary schools, then we'd have a child traveling from Mandera to Kiambu, where Alliance is. That parent in Mandera has no fare to make several trips to Kiambu. So I think parents would need to understand this, and teachers would need to own it for CBC to succeed from where we are. Okay.
And Honorable Julius Meli, my colleague Safin will take us through the teacher recruitment plan by the Teacher Service Commission, and this is a pertinent matter to you and members of the Committee of the National Assembly that you chair. And towards the last meeting where you had with the TSC, and so heated it was that you directed them to come with clear answers as to the plan, as to how they are going to actualize the recruitment of teachers. But when you talk about the clear road ahead, as you have said, which is very clear, to many then, they expect the government to get off the rose-tinted glasses, because there is the infrastructure challenge, and the guideline by the ministry says that if a school does not meet the 60% threshold in terms of the assessment, then learners will be moved to a school that is in close proximity to that for the junior secondary school learners. I mean, if then this is the case, how will this be? Is it not having a compounding effect, because not all schools are well equipped in the country, or are they in better infrastructure stage?
Thank you. Thank you. Let me just say this. For this program or CBC to be actually implemented, there is an aspect of quality, and the infrastructure is central to this. As my colleague Dr. Muga said, one of the central things to this implementation is the state of the infrastructure in schools. One of the failures of the previous administration was trying to move CBC to secondary school, going to build 2 classes in secondary school, the existing secondary schools, and leaving 2 classes in the existing primary schools. As you know, 844 has 8 classes. Mm-hmm. When you are at grade 6, you have grade 7, class 7 and class 8 classes which are free. Now when we are bringing it to the primary school, we are utilizing the 2 classes. 2, we decided as a committee to actually ask the Ministry of Education to do an assessment of the suitability of the schools to the implementation of the programs. Because ultimately we want to have one school system in Kenya where a child starts from PP1 to grade 12. Ultimately, in the long run. The reason now why they are doing this assessment is to ensure that the curriculum is implemented very well. Mm-hmm. I know there are certain, across the country, we have different challenges. We have different levels of development. You will go to a school, for example, in Tana River, for example, or in any part of this country, you will get the student population there, for example, is less than 100 from grade 1 to grade 6. Yet in the neighboring school, and yet they do not have enough facilities, and the teachers also are not enough. So what we told the ministry as a Committee of Education, ensure that this kind of implementation is actually done quite well. What do we consider? We consider the number of teachers, we consider the facilities available. So you can easily merge 2 schools to neighboring schools, ensure that they have enough teachers for grade 7 alone. And as we move along, you build facilities in this new school so that in the next 1 or 2 years, the same school can revert back. I think you remember in those days when students were not able to do CPE or KCP in the same school as it is developing. So that's exactly what the ministry is trying to do. Two, there is the issue of teacher capacity building. As Mugo said, it is an integral part of any education system. If you want to implement CBC, first of all, you need a teacher's attitude, the parent's attitude. You need the child. You need the capacity of trying to reorient it, because the curriculum in grade 7 and 8, as much as it is new, this teacher has to be taken through the various levels of teaching and learning and the skills and the competencies the child is supposed to acquire. So it is actually very important. That is why, as they move ahead, the government has to really put a lot of money in the teacher capacity building. Yes.
And we will be talking about the money and the numbers that have been projected by education experts. Specifically speaking, the Parliamentary Budget Office gave an estimate of over 630 billion shillings to fund, some of the proposals by the Kenya Kwanza government. We look into that. But let me just take you through the recruitment plan by the Teachers Service Commission that seeks to bridge the teacher shortage in the country. And TSC received authority from the National Treasury to recruit about 30,000 teachers in the country. And the teachers are supposed to be reporting to work at the tail end of this month. And in the financial year 2022-2023, the Commission was allocated a budget to recruit 6,000 teacher interns, 4,000 for secondary and 2,000 for primary. So in total, the teachers who are supposed to be recruited comes to about 36,000. And on Saturday, the 10th of December last year, the Commission advertised about 35,550 vacancies. This is how this is going to be distributed. So 9,000 of those posts on permanent and pensionable terms of service are going to be for secondary school teachers who are to be posted to junior secondary schools, 10,000 posts on permanent and pensionable terms for primary school teachers, 21,550 for teacher interns who are going to go to junior secondary schools, and 4,000 posts for teacher interns in primary schools. And of course, just looking specifically into the distribution of vacancies for junior secondary schools, the Commission distributed the vacancies for junior secondary schools based on grade 7 classes in the country, which they approximate to be about 30,550 grade 7 classes in the entire country, assuming we go by the numbers that we have about 30,000 primary schools. So if each primary school has one class of grade 7, that makes 30,550. So accordingly, the Commission has allocated one teacher per class for all the 30,550 grade 7 classes countrywide. And of course, the distribution of vacancies is going to be done proportionately. I could take you through the details of this, but that's in a nutshell how they seek to do this. But at least I guarantee that every grade 7 class in every primary school is going to get one teacher. And I'm just curious, Mheshimiwa, at this point, one would feel this is sort of like a drop in the ocean. One teacher per school? How is this going then to bridge the teacher shortage that was existing even before? Initially, it was put at about 116,000. It is a problem that we have had in our country, not yesterday, not a day before that. It is something that has been perennial. How are you going to address this increased demand of teachers?
Thank you so much. And I think your curiosity was the curiosity of the committee, that how do you actually recruit or employ one teacher per classroom?
Yeah.
We tasked the Teacher Service Commission and we asked them the same question. And actually, what we asked as a committee on education is that there is a very large pool of very educated teachers in the primary school. And that's exactly what we told them. The kind of assessment they are supposed to do currently is to assess how many teachers have gotten graduate skills or have actually graduated to P1, from P1 to graduates. Two, some teachers in primary schools have master's degrees. This is the pool of teachers we asked them, we tasked them, that apart from the one teacher they are recruiting now, they need to go back, look at the competencies of the existing teachers, take them through the capacity building, and have enough teachers. Because grade 7 alone, they have 12
teaching areas.
Teaching areas. So no one teacher can cover the 12 teaching areas, you know that. So with this pool of existing teachers in the primary school, with the existing teachers in the secondary school, now the Teacher Service Commission is supposed to come up with a very clear plan on how the same teachers can be harnessed, their skills can be harnessed in the same school, and the same skills can be harnessed for the teachers, especially in the neighboring secondary schools. Because as we are currently, if you are going to post one teacher for 12 teaching areas, I think you need to be an angel or a miracle to cover those areas. That's exactly what we gave them, and that is one of the things that we shall be looking for as a committee to ensure quality and to ensure standards are maintained and ensure that the teaching learning process goes on well. Okay. That's exactly what we are asking them to do.
Okay, Dr. Mugo, there is the policy of the 100% transition that the government says must be implemented, yet there are challenges that are foreseen by many experts and educationists in the country, including you. For example, the readiness in time for laboratories for the junior secondary schools, consistency in the implementation of the junior secondary school curriculum, the teaching, and in this case, learning and assessment areas, and amongst the other raft of assessment guidelines that the Ministry of Education has provided. I mean, then if the threshold is 45% learners for a junior secondary school class, and then you have one teacher, isn't it a failure on the part of the Teacher Service Commission?
I think it's good to look at it from a contextual point of view, as Honorable Mele has said. First of all, the current standard for primary schools is a teacher per class. And so, which means that that same primary school where the grade 7 will be, will have had theoretically one teacher available, other teacher. And so, if we were to count the numbers, then I think we'd count them as 2.
Yeah.
The one that was freed, because now there won't be standard 7, there'll only be standard 8, and this other additional one. But I think first is to appreciate the 30,000, because I think this is the largest recruitment we've ever had as a one-off. And looking at the education budget, I think it's important to look at that context. The main thing for me is how we will prepare the teachers in the primary school, especially those that Honorable Mele says have that minimum requirement. How are we going to train them? Are we going to train them in a rushed way that they won't even get to integrate the essence and understand this philosophy and new way of educating? Or are we investing fully to ensure that these teachers are well prepared? And if this training has not even started now, and we are in week 2 of January, when is it going to start? So I think those are the questions probably we need to look at.
So I'll take you back to where we started. Do you think we are ready then? Because it's just, you've said 2 weeks
Less than 20 days?
Yeah. And we are asking very pertinent questions about the readiness of the teachers who are supposed to be the pilots of this particular process. Do you think we are at a good place to open doors of junior secondary schools for, is it about 1.2 million learners if the 100% transition is to be a success?
Yeah, more than 1.2 million. I think we have no choice. These children can't be asked to stay at home because we are not ready. So starting from that point, I think it is urgent from where I sit to have this finalized on how are these and when are these teachers going to be trained. We know now actually that the money allocated to training, the 2 billion, if I was given that money, I think one can leverage on technology. We sink a lot of money in workshops and all that, and we don't see the value. We have a lot of innovation. Many corporates now are having weekly trainings of teachers, you know, through virtual labs. So I don't know, I have not seen the plan for training of the teachers. I have not seen the plan for preparing the parents, because parents are also asking, what is our role? Is our role in junior secondary going to be different? And who is going to train the parent? Because we know the Teacher Service Commission is in charge of teachers, and there must be something cooking. But how about the parent? Because if the parent also don't execute their role and mandate in educating and supporting junior secondary, then we won't succeed. So I think from where I sit, I would say we are not ready. I think there's a lot to do before we can say that this junior secondary is going to succeed. We need, I think, to handle this with a lot of urgency so that the identification of those teachers that Honorable Mele is talking about and having them commence the training even on Monday. So that by the time these junior secondary pupils are reporting, these teachers are ready. Because the other schools, the primary schools are opening on 23rd. And which means if we train beyond the 23rd, then those in primary school will be suffering because they'll be missing teachers in classrooms going for training. So that's I think where I am coming from. I think there's need for urgency and an overall way of preparing teachers and parents for junior secondary.
Honorable Mele, because this is also quite a good area, because according to the Parliamentary Budget Office, the Kenya Kwanza administration will need 238 billion Kenya shillings to bridge the 116,000 teacher deficit, which has been an existing gap over time and a sort of perpetual continuity. I mean, that again places the Teacher Service Commission on the spot. Here is also another idea that was flouted during a meeting at the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, a meeting that was chaired by the CS Machogu. And the idea was floated that some teachers in present high schools who have been trained on CBC would be asked, if needed, to teach some subjects in junior secondary schools. It then seems that there's a lot of borrowing from the other part, but here you have 32,000 public primary schools, 10,000 secondary schools. It then means that when you substitute that, there will be a vacuum on the other end. I mean, how will this gap be ever addressed? It seems to be a continuous one.
Yes, Ayub, as a teacher, first of all, let me tell you that teaching is a seamless process. What we want to develop as a country, and that is what the Kenya Kwanza administration is trying to do, is to develop a teaching service that will have an expert running across the school system. So that you'll realize that a teacher who is a grade 4 teacher, for example, has competencies that are able to handle the children in grade 4, 5, 6, that's for example. When you come to grade 7, 8, 9, the same teacher should be able to teach all the way to grade 12. But now we are coming from a system where the education system is compartmentalized, where you as Ayub and Mugo knows that you are supposed to go to ECD in primary, grade 1, 2, PP 1 and 2, that is under county government and a different teacher. When you come to grade 1 to 6, that is the primary school, it is under a different person. When you go to grade 7, 8, 9, is another compartment, up to grade 11, 10, 11, 12. What I'm saying is this. That is what we want actually to destroy in this country, where we want now to come up with a school where I am in grade 6, I can be handled across by a teacher who can teach me competently the skills, and they can run across this the school system. 2, we have now the issues of teachers coming in. As you are right to put it, the teachers are not enough, as we say now. But to ask who can teach where is actually very easy to know, because every head teacher and every education officer across the sub-counties know the capacity of their staff. Even within this, the system that you have, you know who is competent for what, who is competent for what. So when we have these teachers, if they are in secondary school, and you bring them to come and train, a trainer for the grade 1 to grade 6 or grade 7, 8, and 9, it will not take 1 month or 2 months. These are actually honing the skills of an existing graduate. I think you've seen it even in the banking sector and even in the other sectors where capacity building is done regularly. And it does not bring down a system. Even in the developed world, every school system has to undergo capacity building after some time. That is why we have what we call teachers' professional development. That is supposed honing the skill all the time through time. So I want to say that as we move forward, we as an education committee has tasked the government. Can you identify? Can you move forward? Can you let us know this is the number of teachers? The 238 billion that you are talking about is actually for a span of 5 years. As we have said, they are recruiting at 5,000 now. And that is why we want the teachers. That's why the government is recruiting the 10,000 PNP, the 35 interns, so that you can bridge the gap at a lesser cost. Because we know, we are living in this country, all of us, that we are actually at tough economic times. And to really get 238 billion at a go is not almost impossible.
Thank you.
But within the 5 years, we shall reach there.
Okay.
Yeah. Seems like there's going to be what you say, borrowing from one, borrow teachers here, borrow laboratories, you can share facilities here, there. But we'll talk about how practical that is. We continue with this conversation right here on Daybreak as we talk about the state of preparedness of the country to open doors for learners who are supposed to be transitioning to junior secondary school as schools reopen at the end of this month. And we'll be inviting and, sampling some of your views as well. If in case you're a parent, you're a caregiver, or just a concerned stakeholder, have a question concerning this subject, do share that with us on our social media handles. They are open.
That is at Citizen TV Kenya, at Ayub Abdikadir, at Safin_Cheng. The hashtag on Twitter is Daybreak, and we'll be sampling those feedback later towards the tail end of this broadcast. Stay tuned.
Kylian Mbappe, born 20th December 1998. The 23-year-old plays forward for the France national team and Paris Saint-Germain.
Imperial Leather men's range comes in 3 variants: Intense Cool, Sport, and Fresh Burst. These variants deliver a sensational cooling effect while giving you 25 hours of freshness. Imperial Leather, it's okay to care.
Maishani tuinuane.
Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. This is Daybreak. We're talking about the junior secondary school preparedness to receive learners. And of course, as we do this, actually, there is an ongoing assessment of all primary schools across the country, both public and private, to see how much ground they have covered with regards to putting up measures to receive learners. And that is being done by stakeholders from the education sector. And we will be getting a report on how ready we are as a country in the few coming days as this exercise continues. And of course, very many guidelines there issued by the Ministry of Education on what it will take for any primary school to be registered as a junior secondary school. Key among them is that they have to put in place the necessary infrastructure, that is the classroom and the laboratories. They have to have enough teachers. They have to have a threshold of about 45 learners who are in grade 7, and other things that they will need to put in place to just ensure that they deliver quality education to learners before they're given the green light to do this. So the question remains, how many among the over 30,000 primary schools across the country are going to meet the about 60% threshold set by the Ministry of Education?
And of course, as Safin has mentioned, among the other guidelines as enshrined in the statement by the Ministry of Education signed by Belio Kipsang also includes the availability of internet the number of digital learning equipment and their functionality, adequate sanitation facility, land and validity of the title deed of the school, room for sciences, space for agriculture projects and farm tools, water supply, and also power connectivity. Dr. Mugo, I come to you on this. Education is largely, and this is a point that the president has emphasized, that education is the great equalizer. It's the creation of an opportunity. And schools, therefore, are seen as engines of social mobility that drive the thriving of a society and which informs economic growth. But I wonder where the very evident social divide that cropped up when COVID-19 struck the country again will be cropping up when it comes to internet connectivity, room for sciences, and state-of-the-art infrastructure across the schools, as this assessment is ongoing today, is set to end on the 20th.
Yeah, I think you have a very good point. The education is a sword that cuts both sides. First is an equalizer because many children are trapped in a way that only education can help them out. But then when there is such a huge divide of quality across schools, then we are seeing that children who have the privilege of going to schools that have better infrastructure, better teachers, are already on a different path from those that are in schools without teachers, without infrastructure, and so on. And that's the same thing with technology. We wouldn't say that really we will sit and not do anything about technology because it will divide. But I think there are certain policies that need to be re-examined, Ayub. I give an example. We have digital literacy now as a competency of CBC. And so every learner graduating from CBC will have digital learning skills. Now, if you look at now internet coverage in Kenya and the use of smartphones, we are among now the leading countries in Africa. Mm-hmm. And yet, as we speak, the smartphone is outlawed. If you are caught with a smartphone in school, it's a big crime. You may even be sent home. And we are struggling to buy tablets so that children may have devices. So there are all these contradictions, and I think we need to re-examine our history and where we are coming from. I think we are trapped in a situation where we want to educate our children now in this digital era the way we were educated ourselves. I think if we looked at, for instance, how many households have devices now, even children themselves own smartphones that can be used as devices, mm-hmm. so that the money that we are allocating for digital infrastructure is not for every child. It doesn't make sense. Why should you buy my child a smartphone? They leave theirs home, so that we buy another one at school, and half of the children, because the money will not be enough, as Honorable Mele is saying, it will only cover a half. So I think if we re-examine all these policies and open our education in a way that it embraces now technology, understand that we're in a different era. Even these assessments, now move the assessments to platforms to make them cheaper and more accessible. Then that way we'll be able to cover the half that cannot afford. Okay. So when you look at capitation, and I would challenge the parliamentary committee, it doesn't make sense to give all Kenyan children, students, 25,000 for, secondary school. Some proportion of that money, maybe 25%, should be blocked as an equalization fund to give full scholarships to those children who come from very vulnerable backgrounds. Okay. Now we have bursaries. You are given 5,000 bursary by CDF or by the governor's kitty to go, and you have a fee balance of 78,000. So how is that 5,000 going to help you? So we still have, despite the growth of capitation, the growth of scholarships, the growth of all this, we are not using the money to target. Okay. And to create equalization. I think if we don't address this, then technology will continue dividing, and quality will continue to be a big equity issues when children are not accessing equitable quality across.
So you suggest we have the money, we just need to change a little bit of how we the priority areas and how we spend this money that you already have. And I'd just like to also, look at the state of preparedness with regards to infrastructure, Mheshimiwa Meli. And the biggest concern has been the laboratories, at least for classrooms. Some say they have been innovative enough. But if you look at the laboratories in primary schools, already we are struggling with the secondary schools. I was looking at an article here that is citing what the Parliamentary Budget Office was talking about. They're saying that about 50% of our secondary schools currently do not have laboratories. Some of them are struggling to equip the existing laboratories. So the proposal by the President that schools should share is welcome, but if you look at the reality on the ground, where are these laboratories to share? How are we going to address this, from where you sit?
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to say one of the things that is quite key in CBC is the activities of the child. And most of the activities are actually done in two main structures. In the basic school, or in the grade 1 to 6, we need to have what we call an activity classroom or an activity room, where the child is supposed to actually hone her skills or his skills, especially on what can he or she do. Competencies is trying to get the child out naturally. What are your talents? They will be able to hone those particular things in those particular rooms. When you come to the junior secondary or the junior secondary, you need a lab. I don't want Kenyans to be dismayed, because labs are not essentially the buildings. I happen to have grown up in the rural area where our lab was just a corner of the school. And you remember a few years ago, this country lacked textbooks. But in an ambitious plan, it was capable, it is one of the countries that has one textbook per child across Africa. The same thing can be done in terms of laboratory equipments and facilities. What the ministry needs to do, the money that they have been using to buy textbooks. Is it? The money that they have been using to buy textbooks, buy all those materials, if they can buy the lab equipments and distribute across all the schools in the country. And what you need to do, you need a prep room as a teacher. And then the teacher is quite innovative. He'll be able to have a very good lab across one of the classrooms as we are waiting to build the actual lab in these schools. What the student needs, they need the test tubes, they need all that they require, but it can be supplied through the Kenya school, what we call Kenya School Equipment Scheme, SEQUIP. Okay. We even tasked the ministry, and I told them it is not right for a child in Turkana, for a child in West Pokot, for a child in Vanga, or wherever part of this country, not to have those very vital laboratory equipments. The fact that you are not having the room, and I want to agree with Mugo here, the vital person in this whole equation is the teacher. Even if you are having a classroom, maybe under a tree, but with a very competent teacher, with all the requirements, learning will take place. Two, now we are talking about the physical infrastructure. We even tasked the ministry and we asked them as a committee, and that's what we are going to do going forward as a committee of education. Give us the schools that are within the secondary schools, okay, that they share almost the same compound and all that. They can share the facilities. Look at the far-flung schools. Get a fund, partner with the CDF, and build laboratories in those far-flung areas. Have the ministry supply the chemicals, the facilities to those schools the way they have been supplying textbooks. The lifespan of a textbook in most of the schools is about 4 years. So if you have supplied the books for grade 7 this year, you will have another several years to supply them. Take the 1 year out and supply the lab equipments, lab facilities, okay, and all that. Thank you.
Daktari, and you talked about the money aspect, and yes, the National Treasury has started the releasing of the National Government Constituency Development Fund in batches, yes, following the approval by the Attorney General and the communication that was issued to the Speaker, Moses Wamsika Wetangula, on the release following the resolution of the stalemate over the 44 billion Kenya shillings kitty, and Safin will be picking up on that. But Daktari, we talked about the other part, the pillar within this context and the parenting institution. And according to the National Parents Association, to just quote this chairperson, said the government has the right to postpone the school's reopening for 1 or 2 months to have the structures in place before learning resumes. The Member of Parliament, as well as a teacher, alludes to the fact that it isn't mandatory you have the physical structure as long as the equipment are there. Then the long-term plan is to have the structures in place. But this is an institution that is also concerned about the infrastructure pledge made by the government. I mean, is this a call that qualifies heeding?
Yeah, but I think it's important for government to keep its promises to the citizens, because then that yields to deception. But I think looking at how learning happens, you must not have everything that you need on day one, because even the way the curriculum rolls out, you start with induction. Like when we all recall what Form 1 was about. So Term 1 of Form 1 is a transition from primary school, where we are reminded and we build on those basics. We hardly went to any laboratory in Term 1 of Form 1. We started now in going to biology and learning about the cell and using the microscope from Term 2. So I don't really see, I think as long as there is that commitment that these teachers are hired this month, we have maybe a month of intensive training, and we have continuous professional development, as Honorable Mele is saying. But the other thing is also to understand CBC. First, CBC is not sit here, I teach you, and it's about me and the learners in the classroom. CBC is based on the principle that learning happens everywhere, and that learning is beyond academics. So there are things like one of the pillars is value-based education. And we know that values are learned in classroom, yes, but values are also learned out there as students play with each other, or as teachers address the students in the assembly, or as they move from school to home, in the morning or in the evening. And so CBC is busting now the walls, and it's important for Kenyans to start understanding this, that it's busting the 4 walls of the classroom to understand that as children go home, they are learning. As they come, as they are out there playing, they are learning. So this silo effect that has been there, that Honorable Mele has mentioned, is one that we really need to re-examine. Like one of the things I give an example will be happening are practical subjects. We know that we have more than, I think, 2,300 technical and vocational institutions in the country. And many of these are sharing fences with this primary school where the junior secondary school will be. Will we be saying that this vocational training center belongs to the county government and the junior secondary belongs to, because all these are Kenyan children. So how are we going to burst these fences and the walls? Now, one thing that has happened very well since President Kibaki's time was this day secondary schools. So we have now more than half of the secondary schools we have were actually carved out of a primary school. And so they may not have a laboratory, they may not have all this, but we will have a teacher, for instance, and TSC has all this data, a teacher who teaches only because of the subject they teach or where they are, teaches maybe only for 12 hours in a week. And they can have extra hours to move across the fence to this other school and offer something. So I wouldn't say that now children sit at home, because we saw what happened over COVID. Look at all those pregnancies that happened because children were home idle. I would say let's hold hands and we support this, because it's about our children. It's not about the parent, it's not about the teacher, it's not about a parliamentary committee or TSC. It's about our Kenyan children and their best interest. Yeah,
but I understand where you're coming, both of you are coming from with this. Let's be progressive with regards to how we're implementing the CBC. I understand where you both are coming from, but don't you think we are being unfair to the Kenyan child? Because CBC was not implemented yesterday. We did this like years ago, and we knew, just like you said, that they will get to some point where they will get to grade 7. And it is the same crafters of the CBC that knew that the grade 7 learners would need a laboratory, they will need a classroom, they will need all the essentials that now are required in schools. To get innovate here and to say that let's be innovative. They can actually learn under a tree. They can actually do their experiments as long as they have a qualified teacher. Don't you think that's actually being unfair to the Kenyan child?
Let me just interject and say this. Actually, the CBC as implemented a few years ago is not the CBC as intended. I was privileged in the last parliament that I moved the what we call it, the sessional paper on education and reforms. The requirement was, you remember the classes, the several classrooms built by Makoa in the secondary schools. I agree with Madam what you are saying. Those were actually the laboratories that were supposed to be built. But along the way in the implementation of CBC, someone decided to change it. And as my friend here, Dr. Muga, said, the intention of this government in the Vision 2030 is to make education accessible to as many people as possible, 100%. So when CBC was actually designed, it was supposed to move from grade 1 all the way to grade 9 under in the what we call the primary school system. The two classes, you remember the government built two small classes. If you go to Alliance High School or to go to Mangu School, you know there's a complex school system. Then the government just built some two very small classrooms costing 700,000. Those particular classrooms were supposed to be, one, as a laboratory classroom in the primary school, and two, an activity classroom in the basic school, in the same primary school. Now it was actually prioritizing them wrongly. That was an implementation error, mistake that the government did. So as we move forward, we cannot be so much pessimistic and alarmist the way that parent you are saying quoted, that, oh, we should wait for 2 months. It is not possible. The issues that are at play are, one, do we have the teachers? Yes. Two, do we have the room? Yes. The existing free class, the students now, the old system are in grade what? They are in standard 8. We have a room which is free, which is now for grade 7. That particular room is enough. Two, some schools in this country are known to have very small population. And even the larger schools, and I agree with my colleague here, we are having a problem as a country where we have a silo system of education. Two secondary schools, there is a secondary school and there's a primary school, almost in the same compound. Yet, you want to say you don't have a lab. Yet the neighboring secondary school has 3 laboratories. The students are supposed to use them. These are our facilities. Two, those far-flung primary schools and secondary schools, those far-flung primary schools, now we have funds to construct them. And two, I just say this, the ministry and the government need now to redesign their way of supplying lab equipment, lab chemicals across all schools the way they have been doing the textbooks. And it will be very easy. There is what I saw in the, I think what we call in Semaster, a mini lab, small one, which can actually be taken across many of these schools, and it will solve that particular problem quite easily. There's something I want to really commend about digital literacy. And I want to agree with my colleague that there is a problem in this country where you criminalize a phone. You want to have digital literacy. I think we really need to have a policy shift on the use of phones in our schools, so that whereas the government is trying to buy laptop for every child, the same government is buying a laptop for Honorable Meli's child, yet I'm able to buy my own, on Ayub's child, and Mugo's child. We need now to agree. And even on the issues of bursaries, we are giving bursaries to children, even, what do we call it?
Who are capable.
Yes, who are capable. And we are even asking the children, do not bring your phones to school. And then you're asking them now, come and use a what do you call it, a tablet. We really need to sit down, have a very clear digital literacy policy on our schools and how to have these devices.
Daktari, because talking about device, because you are advocating for a mind shift to change our thinking towards that.
Yes.
But the point is here, who regulates what they access on these devices? I mean, a feature on Instagram or Snapchat is more attractive than a history class. Who checks over the kids?
I think this question should go not just to schools, but to Kenyans. Because as we speak now, the kids are at home. They are using the phones. So I think it needs to be a broader debate, not criminalizing the content they access, but rather empowering the child to be able to determine the good content and the content they shouldn't access, to empower parents on how does one, even if you have Wi-Fi at home or on that phone, it has so many security features that the parent can use to block some of these sites. So if we can do it at home, why not at school where we have actually just one Wi-Fi that the children will be using? So there are solutions, but I think we are still blinded by our past because we didn't have phones, and because we think when they have phones they'll steal examinations.
Actually, that's
and yet I mean, if we don't want them to steal examinations, and here we are, PS now authorizing internet connectivity, isn't that exposing them to stealing in schools? So we need to move, I think, from the past to this new era and a new way, because there is no reason now why in the next 5 years, when they are still in government, we should not have every child everywhere, even in Turkana, in Mandera, in Lamu, using now digital technologies for learning. But the teacher question, because teachers will not give what they don't have. And we know there are teachers who have digital phobia. The previous government gave those laptops, and there were head teachers who locked them very safely.
Up to today.
Because they were afraid, I don't know that, they don't know how this would work. And actually, children don't need to be trained. All you need is to have those devices connected to power, opened, and children will learn on their own. So I think the teacher, the new teacher is a big question. And for me, prioritizing how we will train and prepare teachers is priority number one for CBC to succeed. Because a teacher who has believed, is empowered, knows how, will use any resources available to make it happen. Okay. But it's like we are moving 2 steps forward and 1 step back, because we are still turned to this, if teachers are assessing, like now, look at what was happening in grade 6. And I think government should be apologizing to the grade 6 parents. Because we decided they were going to do an examination, there were police in the classrooms managing examinations, then we said there are no results. We don't even know what, we won't even use those results. So we keep moving forward. We cannot trust the teacher because we think if the teacher assesses the child, they will not say the truth or they not give the right score. So that empowering and trusting and believing in, and having the teachers also now believe in themselves and believe that really this is not about themselves, it's about a society, it's about the Kenya and our children. All right,
we have feedback we are going to be sampling in a few, but Mheshimiwa, very quickly.
Yes, I just want to just recap and say this, that the digital devices that we have in our homes are actually used by the children and their parents at home. And as you know, the first educator is the parent. And that's why even in CBC you are stressing, let the parent stay with the child. Let the parent be checking what the child is doing. So even if you are asking the child not to come with the phone in school and how the features in the phone, some of these children that we have are more literacy competent than the teachers. They actually have very educated on that. 2, previously, before, we used to have what we call in the functional literacy, you want to know arithmetics, English, and that. Now, the digital literacy or the functional literacy requires that all of us must be digital literate. So when you talk about a school not having an internet, when you talk of a school not having power, when you talk of a school not having the gadget, actually, we are going back, not 1 step, as he said. We are going back 5 steps from where we are supposed to be.
Okay.
We really need to allow the parent, allow the child, and then only put security features. Everybody has to have this device, and it has to be mandatory. The way education is free and compulsory.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll talk about the question of CDF and the accessibility that you have talked about. Also a point that the president underscored when he said that capable persons shouldn't be given CDF, because he said, if, as you have pointed out, that you are capable, Daktari is capable, Safina and I are capable,
yes,
then the less privileged who come from vulnerable households should be prioritized or given a priority as to the CDF, which is the Constituency Development Fund. Let's sample your feedback on Twitter and then proceed with that talk on the money aspect and the CDF, now in batches to the constituencies. Here's what we are saying. Engineer Lazaro says big challenges facing the full implementation of the competency-based curriculum, ranging from proper infrastructure to training of teachers.
Thank you, Engineer. Amaganga Mustafa is saying joining senior secondary high school, will CAPSEA certificate be used as qualifications to determine which school one merits, or it will be another junior secondary national examinations? A question there. Thank you for that.
Daktari and Honorable Meli will be responding to that. SAWS says the possibility of sharing in rural area is next to impossible. Schools are kilometers apart. School openings in 2 weeks. Assessment of these schools is ongoing. The government is not ready for the competency-based curriculum implementation.
All right, you have one other feedback here. CBC is here to stay. Thus, the new regime should correct some weak links due to hurriedly put in place hurriedly by the past regime. Thus, the identification of junior secondary school be done soberly. Thank you for that. And
one final one from Taruzo89. He says, in my ward in Embobut, /Embolot in Elgeyo Marakwet County, we have 2 secondary schools with a lab and 26 primary schools. How are we going to navigate this? I mean, this is going to bring about overcrowding and flooding of learners from, in this case, the viewer from Elgeyo Marakwet County. 2 pertinent questions, Daktari and Honorable Meli. On the question, Daktari, of the CAPSEA examinations, what happens to these learners? Is another examination going to be administered?
I think CAPSEA was meant to be a formative, what we call formative assessment initially. And formative means that we were to use the assessments conducted by teachers over time to conclude on the coverage and acquisition of the competencies for primary. It was not meant to be used for transition, you know, like the way we use KCPE. You got these marks, so you go to this school. Because anyway, they are going to the school that they were in. So there's not going to be any need for an examination to know how many marks they got so that they transit. They are all of them going to move to the next grade, which is junior secondary, grade 7. But I think moving forward, having an examination at grade 6 is really not necessary, because what is it for? If we say this one has 400 and this other one has 200, so what do we want them to do? And who has failed?
But that was not the communication. Many parents actually and learners thought this was an exam, and you could actually see how they were preparing.
But even the government, and that's why I still insist we owe parents and the children apology, because there were even police manning those CAPSEA examinations. What was that show all about? And then now decide that it's not anyway the KCP that it was meant to be. So I think there is no need for a high-stake examination at grade 6. There won't even be a need for a high stake at grade 9 now, moving forward. Yeah,
because I believe that was the question by Mustafa, the transition into senior secondary school, how that is going to be
Because now senior secondary schools we are not going to have national schools and extra county and sub-county. I think those ones are dying.
Yeah.
What we are going to have now is a reclassification, so that we know the schools that are science academies, the schools that are arts academies, the schools that are for technical and STEM. And so what will happen from grade 9 is that once the decision has been made by the parents, the teacher, and the student on what line, which pathway they should go to in senior secondary, then there'll also be 100% transition at that level, but now to that pathway. So there won't be now an Alliance High School and a Kenya High School. The way we know them, they will be specializing in a certain thing, and they will be also largely serving students who want to specialize in that. So that the way we know examinations now, I think is going to disappear. Maybe just remain at grade 12, because at grade 12 is where we will have an examination that now determines placement into tertiary training.
Mheshimiwa, how do you break this beautiful future down for that resident in Elgeyo Marakwet who says that they have 2 secondary schools with laboratories and 26 primary schools?
That is true. In fact, in some regions, some of these schools are 50 kilometers apart. How do you share? This beautiful future shall only be done by the provision of what we call the mobile labs across all schools in the country. And this is actually within the ability of the government. 2, if you go to those two secondary schools in Elgeyo Marakwet, we can't crowd everybody to the 2 schools. With the provision of CDF, and that's why members of parliament were actually passionate with it, and even the general public, that let CDF exist. With those particular facilities, and we even tasked as an education committee, as the government, let them reintroduce a fund, almost like the transitional grants they were giving, so that every constituency across the country, plus the CDF, we use that money to build labs across those particular areas that are very needy. 2, when you talk about assessment, the assessment issue, Kenyans are actually obsessed with the meritocracy kind of assessment, where you need to know Ayub was position 1, Mugo was 2, Meli was 3, and someone was last. I just want to pose this question, that any assessment in any education system is supposed to achieve 3 main things. 1 is to assess if the competencies intended by the educator were acquired by the learner. 2, to check if the learning, teaching methods are working. And 3, to see if the intended outcomes were achieved. Now, I want to pose this question, I think, to the general public, that you've seen doctors and engineers going through assessment in universities. And many of us trust doctors whom we didn't see their grades splashed on newspaper headlines, splashed on television rooms saying, so-and-so was grade 1 doctor, so-and-so was last. And we really trust them with our bodies, we trust them with everything. The same thing that we have kept saying in schools, we should actually ensure that what we need to develop as a country is a teacher who is trustworthy, a school that is able to say, this so-and-so got these grades and is now rightfully moving to the next level. And that is what the agriculture teachers were doing across all schools in the Republic. So the KPSEA exam, and I think this is what the government and everyone has to apologize to parents, that the mentality of saying a grade 6 child was now being prepared to go to a junior secondary school was actually very, very wrong. And it was bad.
Okay.
The intention was have the assessment, have the child move, use the assessment now, intended purposes. Check were the skills acquired. 2, was the teaching learning methods quite good. And 3, were actually the intended outcomes of that particular thing acquired. So actually gotten. So every exam, and that is why, and that is why this country, even in the region, is really lagging behind. Because we still go for exams in London. Well, Uganda and Tanzania are just doing exams. Our trust levels are actually almost 0. Why at 60 years after independence, having all our exams printed in very expensively, yet our neighbors here just do theirs and there's no problem. You trust a doctor from Uganda, you trust a teacher from Uganda and Tanzania, and you don't trust your own. You can't trust your neighbor. We really need to have something on the attitude and even the way we carry ourselves as a country. Thank you.
Okay.
I don't know how you're going to speak to the psychological impact this also had on the learners who, you know, this tradition that we usually do when
Yes.
we're transitioning to a new school. Some of these grade 6 learners held farewell parties. They said bye to their peers. They had known that it was it, we're actually going.
Yes.
And the traditional, you know, way of doing it when you're going to another school. And that last minute about turn, it came at the very tail end of the year, if you ask me. And it was just like a surprise for a majority of these learners. How are they going to face the same school, the same friends they had said they're, you know, I mean, is it going to have any sort of psychological impact on them? Maybe Daktari?
I think the one thing as you speak that I'm thinking I would love to see is the president addressing the grade 6 children and their parents, because they really need to be talked to understand this. Yes, yesterday I was being asked, I had a niece who was in grade 6, and they were asking me what happened to the results. How will I know what I got?
Yeah.
And you see now, these are very legitimate questions because they had expectations. So one of the things I think that I'm hoping Honorable Mele can help Kenyans access very fast are the guidelines for junior secondary. Like now there were talks like you know maybe a different uniform might make them feel they are now more senior. but now
maybe they wear a trouser from a short.
But the question is now at least for this year, will now the grade 7 wear trousers and the standard 8 are wearing shorts, and yet they are more senior? And will we ask the standard 8 parents to buy new uniform for 10 months?
Yeah.
So I think that's where the guidelines were needed, because what we saw was the president receiving a report from the Presidential Working Party that said that domiciling will be in primary school. But in terms of now the nitty-gritties, the details, who will teach junior secondary, what will the parent do? You know, will it be the same head teacher or will there be a principal? All these expectations, I think Kenyans are anxious to hear, and it would be a beautiful thing if Honorable Mele, if we have a President Ruto addressing this, so that children and parents really can feel also where the Kenya Kwanza government is coming from and why this decision had to be made.
Honorable Julius Mele, then we have talked about the far-flanked areas is what you pointed out, the introduction of mobile laboratories. But there is a good component of this chain that also needs attention, and adequately so.
Yes.
Learners with special needs. I mean, how will they be catered for in this whole context of the debate on reforming the education sector in the country, and to be specific, what's now on our hands, on our palms, which is the junior secondary school?
Thank you. I think what I want to just be very clear about is, first of all, the issue of CBC. CBC has an integration aspect in it. Across the land, and I think many of us are differently endowed. When you talk about disabilities, we have learners who have the physical, the mental, and all forms. One of the aspects that CBC is supposed to address is to have a competence-based curriculum with an integration aspect in it, so that when you have students in particular areas, when they have maybe mobility disabilities, they need to be catered for. First of all, through the construction of rooms. I think you've seen most of our schools across the country now. One of the requirements, not even our schools, all the infrastructure facilities in the country, they are supposed to cater for the physically challenged. Two, for those who have problems of hearing, they need to have the hearing aid devices. For those who have mental problems, they also have assistance within those particular integrated schools. Maybe those who are actually seriously impaired are actually placed in special kind of centers. But if you are talking about mobile labs, it is very easy to have them across all schools in the country. Two, Let me just go back a little bit about the issue of the uniform, the issue of different, the thinking of the child. That the child at first had thought that he's moving out of the school. Surely, that is exactly what we said earlier on, that the government needs to apologize on that. But all of us have had problems when we want to move from one point to another. Yet, you cannot achieve those particular movement. This child will actually be taken through a psychological session. Okay. Be told now, your grades are this, and I think the minister is supposed to release the KPSEA results. He had actually promised the country on 16th. Yeah. He will release them. After releasing those exams, the child will proceed to the next grade in the same school. It will be the same students. But the only difference is he's going to have a different course, the textbooks and everything will be different. Even the teaching and everything will be different. Two, this particular child, the issue of uniform is actually an impediment to education in this country. In fact, we need to move to a state where the uniforms should not be compulsory in schools, provided the child is tidy, is well-dressed. I saw one of the schools that were asking parents 12,000 shillings for a pair of uniform. Assuming you are getting a parent from rural Mandera, rural Turkana, rural Vanga, or any other part of the country. Apart from school fees, the levies they are being asked is quite bad, and it is wrong. So we need to move from the time when we are having uniforms to a time when the child is tidy, well presented, and able to sit in class. And what does the uniform do? This kind of having a trouser, a short, a different kind of thing actually puts the child, even those who are not able to have those particular things, to even have a stigma that so-and-so is having a trouser, so-and-so is having this. Why don't we have one system where we do not charge? Okay. And actually it impedes parents from accessing education. And one of the parents was asking me, yes, I have the school fees. The school fees is 15,000 or 20,000. The school uniform is 12,000 per pair. So 2 pairs is how much?
24.
And the school fees is 20,000.
So more than even the school fees?
Yes.
Okay.
So it is wrong, actually, to have that.
But how possible is that, Mheshimiwa, in Kenya? You know, if you ask some of these children to come to school with whatever they have, the kind of things you will start seeing some of them walking in with. The other day there was this.
I do agree with you, but when we talk of a smart casual, do we wear a uniform?
No.
Do we? Even in your own house, your kids don't wear the same dress. Do they wear the same? Or you do have uniform in your homes?
There is the question on the standardization.
Yes, that's all.
Okay.
You standardize, have a good short, have a good shirt, have a good blouse, and that's all.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the burden of cost now, because now for all this to be made a reality, somebody has to part with some money for it. Some budget has to be, allocated for it. And earlier you cited what happened, by the construction of classrooms in secondary schools as an implementation error.
Yes.
I'm concerned because this implementation error costed us about 8 billion.
Yes.
8 billion shillings to construct 10,000 schools. That was the figure we were given.
That are now vacant.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really concerned as a taxpayer.
You are leaving 2 classrooms vacant, going to construct 2 rooms.
Are we then going to replicate this, in this new dispensation, constructing we have about 30,000 primary schools. If I go by this mathematics, 8 billion constructing 10,000 classrooms, then if you are to construct classrooms in each of the 30,000, you'd have to part with about 24 billion shillings approximately. Who is going to foot this bill? That's my question, Mheshimiwa.
We posed the same question to the Ministry of Education. And we asked them, how prepared are you? And as a Kenya Kwanza administration, we as the members of parliament who oversight government, we told them that they must have a very clear plan on how to build the laboratories, to build the extra grade 9 classroom. You know that we are going to have 1 extra grade 9 classroom. After this year, the class 8 students will be in secondary school. So we'll have an extra 1 classroom. They need to have 1 classroom built and a laboratory. And we asked the government, and I think we were tasked by the president, to ensure that when we get the CDF, we prioritize on the construction of laboratories, but we also ask the government to actually invest, to put in almost similar amount of monies to build, if the constituencies are going to build, for example, 5,000 laboratories through CDF, the government needs to put in an extra 5,000 so that in 2-3 years' time, we shall be able to actually finish this issue of lab and classroom construction. 2, you'll realize that, as I told you earlier on, schools that are within the same compound, we don't prioritize them in the construction of the lab. That's why we asked the ministry, can you carry out a proper assessment of the infrastructural facilities across the country? And then you tell us which areas do we start with. And the government also have to put their input through transitional grants, which shall be actually spread across the country equally, even through constituencies. And it can actually be done very easily.
Okay.
Yes.
Dr. Mugo, the question on the National Government Constituency Development Fund, the release now in batches of the whole 44 billion Kenya shillings kitty. I mean, members of parliament are also Kenyans. They are parents, they are stakeholders. How would they prioritize this? Because they are also a part of the engine that is charging the education sector in the country with regards to the prioritization of needy students from vulnerable households. How important will that be? And would a consideration come from the 290 members of parliament?
I think the one thing I would urge on Parliament is cost control, because those classrooms that were constructed, we had they were costing 700,000. The standard classroom that I know now, CDF will want to construct is double the cost when you follow the public work specifications. And of course, we know that within that 1.4 million, there is a cut for someone, you know, corruption follows that money. And there are many Kenyans now plying around schools, waiting for tenders, so that they may do substandard work, they may, hype up the cost. So I don't know what Parliament will do to really bring the cost of construction down, because then we are very unfair to the taxpayer. We are very unfair to the children that we are supposed to serve. We are stealing this money of the classrooms and the labs to put in our pockets when schools are really suffering. So I don't know how CDF can be supported by values of integrity, values of the common good, for us to be able to realize infrastructure for our schools. From where I sit in civil society, I think we are concerned about the greed in this country and the lack of consideration for the common good.
Can you address that concern, Mheshimiwa?
Sure, I want to disagree with my colleague Mugo on this. In a study, I think it was done by one of the civil societies, one of the most effective funds across the country between 2002 and 2015 was CDF. You'll realize that even the cost of classrooms in my constituency, I have constructed a classroom earlier on with 500,000. We've been able to remove all the mud classes and even timber classes across the constituency. And this is as a result of the CDF fund. A few notorious cases, I don't want to rule them out. They might be there. But one of the best funds that has impacted this society, especially in security, the construction of police posts, CDF has done quite well. Construction of classrooms, laboratories, and more importantly, the provision of bursaries. Most of these bursaries that we give as Constituency Development Fund are actually done through public participation. A week ago, I was in my constituency. Okay. We sat down. The community leaders themselves identify so-and-so is needy, and is given a form to fill, and is given the bursaries there. The issue that Mugo is actually alluding to, it happens across even county governments, even the central government and everybody else. And we want to fight that love for greed, the greed for misuse of public resources.
Okay, to call it corruption.
Yes, corruption.
Which is more or less corroding the institutions of government.
Yes.
Okay.
It cuts across everywhere, but if you check how CDF is being used across most of the constituencies, it has impacted the lives of Kenyans quite well. And actually, it is the best thing. But it's not enough. That's why you saw in our parliamentary presentation, and we said, as much as it has teething issues, and every time you've seen that the laws are being stricter every other time, and the role of the member of parliament, CDF, is almost patronage. Actually, it doesn't do much. Apart from the chairman and having all those institutions there, they don't do any particular procurement on the monies that they are being given. Lastly, especially on the issue of classrooms, laboratories, and all this, even if you sit down right now and assign CDF on these particular projects, the monies are not enough. That's why I said earlier on, the government need to come out, and for one lab which is contracted by CDF, the government also builds another one. If they build 2, the government builds 2, so that it's actually enough for the whole country.
Honorable, just a follow-up on the question you earlier raised on uniforms, because it's also a matter that is subject to, to just take some clarity. For instance, in Parliament, where you sit, you are either in official or attire. For the case of Muslim members of Parliament, the thob or kanzu is allowed, but not jeans, not khaki, not a T-shirt. Then talking about standardization, because that, in your case, it's a case of discipline and order, uniformity across board.
That is it.
And which is also across cuts government institutions. For the case of the schools then, how would you, prove your point in terms of who checks over what? Because there will be different dress codes. You'll have a cocktail of different attires, and this is a schooling environment.
That's a school. Let's just, 4 of us here. 1, 2 of us are in tie. Him is not in a tie. And all this, even the kind of dress that you put on, the basic shirt, that neat shirt, it's not supposed to be white. It can be green. It has to be clean. It's that kind of trouser or the short has to be a good short. It has not to be torn. All that is quite enough. You just visit to schools across even the region, most parts of the world. Many countries have left the uniform system. And one of the things why many countries have left the uniforms, the use of uniform, is to really make education accessible to everyone. I gave you an example of that parent who was told you pay 12,000 shillings for 2 pairs of what? No, for 1 pair of uniform. 2 pairs of uniform is how much?
Mathematically,
24,000. And the school fees is 20,000.
If you put,
so by the end of the day, and that particular child has a good dress, has a good skirt, and is able to go and sit in a classroom and do what? And read and proceed.
Mheshimiwa, would we rather not address the cost
aspect?
Yeah, as opposed to just eliminating uniforms, because that then would say even the police shouldn't wear uniform, that the discipline forces shouldn't.
The discipline forces all over the world, I think
why
all
uniforms
know.
were introduced.
The discipline force all over the world are supposed, they are called the uniform force. The other's one name.
Practically then, Honorable Meli, practically then, the reason as to why they do that is
to maintain discipline
and order. And that's why we have school uniforms. So for our case then here,
and even for security, to identify that that's a school, that's a child.
School child.
Correct. For example, our boss wouldn't allow us to come here to, in casual, for instance, or without a tie here. In the case of a schooling, then who will check over if someone is in jeans, in khaki, and you are dealing with kids who fancy fashion clothing? For example, if he comes to school with tattered jeans.
Let me just say this, so that we put this to a close, that the kind of clothing that you have is actually standardized, provided it is what? It is the right attire. Is it? I'm not saying you are not coming in with fancy uniform, have a fancy cloth or a good dress, a good shirt. And if the school needs a tie, then have a good tie. That's all. It will not have a problem.
But there must be an extra eye that checks over the regulation aspect.
Yes.
Okay. Because it has to be decent.
Yes.
Okay. But I think, when I look at, for instance, many times I go to places like Limuru in July. It's very cold and children are in shorts.
Yes.
So I don't know whether it's colonial. Where did shorts come from? Because they no longer put on shorts at home.
Yes.
So I think even in uniform, I think we have a lot of this traditional hangover.
Yes.
that we school in shorts, our children must school in
Even
shorts.
a child in Turkana is on a tie when it is 40 degrees.
So
very hot.
But I think the cost aspect, there are three costs in education, and we need to hear how this can be addressed. Mostly we speak about the direct costs, tuition.
Yes.
The cost has come down and so on. But the indirect costs where uniform belong, you know, lunch money, all these other monies, prevent many children from accessing, especially secondary school, even as we speak. Then we have the opportunity costs of schooling. What else would I be doing if I were not in school, or what is schooling denying me? And especially for orphans, for those children that have to be in child labor, and for those young mothers now, you know, teenage mothers who have babies. I think if we look at these three types of costs, so that when government is talking about costs, we are not just addressing the direct, but we have circulars released even for the indirect cost of education. This 12,000, what was done to that school? And these schools are known.
Yeah.
Yes.
But because that money is shared between the principal and someone else who is supposed to be asking, I think government needs to hold everyone to account so that the parent and the Kenyan child can benefit.
Well said, Dr. And when you say government, I just throw it back to Mheshimiwa because I believe your government. So tell me, because you've held most of these stakeholders to account, TSC, the Ministry of Education, in this whole process of implementing CBC, what is it that they gave you that was satisfactory in regards to how you are going to cushion Kenyan parents from, you know, bearing the burden of cost? Because I would cite an example as we speak right now. Some schools, some private, have actually adjusted their fee structure for those learners who are going to grade 7. Ideally, if they were just going to standard 7, they would pay differently. But now, because they're going to grade 7, the school fee has been hiked a bit. Is this supposed to be the case?
I think it's not supposed to be. Just that a child is progressing from grade 4 to grade 5 to grade 6 to grade 7, what the government or what the institution needs to adjust, maybe a bit, I would say, is maybe on the cost of the lab equipments, the cost of employing a new, maybe staff, maybe a lab technician, you factor into the fees, or the cost of maybe buying fabrics, maybe for technical education and drawing and all that. But the fact that just a child is transiting from grade 6 to grade 7, you just hike fees is very, very regrettable.
So this cost, who should bear it? Is it the parent or the government?
As we asked the ministry, we told that cost should actually be borne by the government, because lab equipment and chemicals is actually a tuition component. When you talk about a lab technician, it's part of the tuition process. Though it is in what we call the capitation. The government gives schools about 22,000 in capitation. One of the components of capitation is personnel emolument. So in this particular case, the difference in fees, especially in private schools and even institutions, should be quite very small, negligible. But when the taking advantage of a parent, just because a child is transiting from grade 7 to grade 6 to grade 7, and now maybe in the same environment, almost in the same classroom, the next classroom actually, where grade standard 7 pupils were. Because grade 8 students, standard 8 pupils are in the last room.
Okay.
So if I'm moving from grade 6, I'm going to grade 7, the next room, and then the fees difference is 30,000, you must actually come out clearly. What is this that is making fees 30,000? But if it is 2,000, 3,000 shillings because of the lab equipment, the employment of a new lab technician, and the buying of some few things used in the lab, it is understandable. But it should not be so much big difference.
Okay. Dr. Mugo.
But one of the things, let me just say this, one of the things that we asked the ministry to do is actually to really bring the cost of education down across the country, because we are in hard economic times. And actually, when the cost of living is hiking, and now you want to hike fees, and then you want to hike everything, actually, we are going to make education for the few. It will actually for the rich and for those who are able to go to schools. Okay. And actually, we are going to have a problem as a country. So we really need to look at it, and we asked them, and we as a committee, we told them we should put them to task. We are going to put them to task, especially on trying to bring the cost of education and rein in on the rogue schools that are actually, they are colluding with uniform outlets.
All right.
To really make the cost of education impossible. Thank
you. Dr. Mugo, earlier on my colleague had outlined the plan by the Teacher Service Commission to recruit teachers and the 36,000. But there is also another aspect that ought to get attention. Festus Mutua on Twitter, he's asking, apart from junior secondary school January recruitment, are we going to have another recruitment to address teacher shortage in secondary schools as well? Are the junior secondary school teachers going to receive the same pay as well as senior secondary school teachers? There is the pay aspect and also employment of secondary school teachers, even as you focus on the junior secondary schools.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question, and Honorable Mele can respond.
Maybe I can.
But I think what the president communicated, at least I heard that, was that 30,000, that 36 is the beginning. And every year, in the Kenya Kwanza government, we'll have more to cover for the shortage. So what we expect, by 2027, is that the current gap will be covered. And that's the promise, at least, we received from the Kenya Kwanza government. In terms of pay, I think we need to re-examine this, because here we peg payment largely on whether you're a primary school teacher, you're a secondary school teacher, and that I hope is going to change. Because we know that it is actually at early childhood, the foundation, where the best teacher is needed. And here we do it the reverse. We have volunteers. Some of the ECD centers are in churches. You don't even know who teaches. And here, when you go to primary school, you find those teachers that are on disciplinary, drunkards, are the ones in grades 1, 2, 3.
2, 3, yes.
Because we need the best teachers in standard 8 to drill the children so that they pass. And our priorities are just upside down. And that's why we continue, actually, to suffer. So the way the future ought to look like is that a teacher ought to be acknowledged, not because on the basis of where they are teaching, but their qualification, their experience over time, and so on, such that the disparities across a B.Ed teacher in primary and a B.Ed teacher in secondary would actually disappear. And we now focus on the qualification of the teacher, the years of experience, and so on, for us to be able to remunerate them.
Yes.
Yes.
To that question?
Yes, yes. Let me also contribute and agree with Dr. Mugo on one, the issue of teachers. There is a simulation on how the Kenya Kwanza government is supposed to really bridge this gap in 5 years. The first year, we are recruiting 10,000 teachers. The next 10,000 plus 20,000 interns, plus now what do we normally call natural attrition. So those totals to around 36,000. Next year, about 20 or 30,000 again will be recruited. So that in 5 years' time, 116,000 teachers will have been recruited. Two, on the issue of natural attrition, these are teachers who, in around 11th Parliament, I think it was in the 11th Parliament, where we agreed that some teachers will have actually leave the teaching service to greener pastures. Those who have died, those who have retired, and those who have actually left service because of one reason or another.
Okay.
The Teacher Service Commission are supposed to recruit this team yearly on quarterly basis, so that in December they shall be doing the replacement. They normally call it replacement and advertisement. Every other time, about 10,000 teachers or 5,000 teachers leave the service. So we asked the government, if Honorable Mele was teaching and he left to be a member of parliament, he needs to be replaced because he was earning a salary. So we actually developed a policy and told the ministry, the Teacher Service Commission, recruit teachers based on the natural attrition.
All right.
Two, the payment of teachers is based on what we call opportunities for gone, economics of education. The kind of training Mugo has gone through in early learning If he's a PhD holder, what he's supposed to do, he should be enumerated better than even a B.Ed in secondary school. Yet he's what? He's teaching preschool. The biggest problem we have in this country is where you enumerate the teachers and everyone else based on where their station of teaching. Someone is teaching Form 1 class or Form 2 class, is it? Mm-hmm. He is a diploma holder. And him is a master's degree holder. He is teaching grade 3 and 4, and what do we call it? Grade 3 or 4. He is earning less than that particular individual. That is now what we want to really realign and make sure that everyone is employed based on the skills, based on his output.
Thank you.
And based on what he's going to do in that particular classroom. Lastly, maybe to just say this. That is why we have tasked the Teacher Service Commission. That is why when they appeared before us, we asked them, can you go and give us the qualification of the teachers? What is their grade? What is their earnings? How are you motivating them by moving them up the grades until we have now a teaching service that is not pegged on the station? You know, when I talk of the station, you are a PhD holder and you are in primary school and you are teaching that particular grade. You need to be recognized and you need to be remunerated based on the skills that you have. Yeah. Thank you.
Considering now the confusion in the centers, because now we are going to have primary school teachers who are also junior secondary school teachers.
And that's why we said one school system. We have
secondary school teachers who are junior secondary school teachers as well. So which station are you going to use to base how much you're going to pay this teacher?
Yes.
That's very pertinent. Thank you so much, both of you, for creating time for us this morning. Of course, this is a conversation we cannot conclude in one sitting. It's a progressive journey to implement the competency-based curriculum, just 3 weeks to the reopening of schools. And we were talking about the dilemma, the gray areas with regards to how schools are prepared to receive the over 1.2 million learners who sat for the CAPSEA assessment last year. And we have been hosting a panel of 2 gentlemen in studio, Mheshimiwa Julius Meli, the Member of Parliament for Tinderet constituency, who also chairs the Education Committee of the National Assembly, and Dr. John Mugo, who is an education expert.
And thank you to you for watching the broadcast. This is the story, Safin, we need to share with Willis. I'm sure it's of interest.
The DNA collection kit, apparently turns out to be a collection kit.
No, not the test result.
Disappointed. We actually thought you'd get your results on the table, but the question has been how many marriages will survive this test.
Okay, and Willis is up next. I'm sure this is the new year. It's day number 11. Financial resolutions will be the topic Willis will be handling up next year on the broadcast. And thanks for waking up with us, and thanks for making Daybreak your #1 show for the morning reviews of the papers and also analysis of the day's topic. I am Ayub Abdikadir Abdi. Safin and I will see you next week at the same time on Wednesday. Good morning.
Good morning.